great conceptual artist and not be able to write your way out of a paper bag or think yourself through an argument. It may challenge some of our ideas about what conceptual art really is. So, we'll come to that as well. And here's the line that's very famous, and it depends on the translation, how it moves. A couple of these, get cited a lot. Up to now, literature has exalted a pensive immobility, ecstasy, and sleep. We intend to exalt aggressive action, a feverish insomnia, the racer's stride, what replaces beauty. For many years, a certain idea of abjection has replaced beauty in different types of art forms. And not necessarily so different as 100 years ago.
That's something I was interested in when Perloff talks about how Marinetti, I think she said he converts like politics into performance or a kind of the lyric theater.
Look at that line. This is that she turns. This is on page 4. He turns. I'm sorry.
68.
He turns politics into a lyric theater.
I just think that that's where she's trying to like judge that gap, that there's, that he has a kind of performative aspect to it that makes it more, I guess, culturally appealing to a greater public.
Mm-hmm. And this is a big question. I mean, this is top of 68, where he's a mediocre late symbolist. As a thinker, he's almost totally derivative. His extravagant statements are more Nietzsche than anybody else. But as what we now call a conceptual artist, Marinetti was incomparable. The strategy of his manifestos, performances, recitations, and fictions being to transform politics into a kind of lyric theater.
But then, interestingly, on page 70, she talks about how Marionetti's play didn't. She talks about how the audience all but disregarded
the Boccioni, the sculpture. That it's supposed to be like this great indicator of like the futurist aesthetic, but it's still.
Is this the dog on? Who did the dog on the leash, where it's just kind of cute?
Oh, the one that's like all
little legs, and you're like, oh, when it's supposed to be speed.
No, but I was thinking of the bronze sculpture.
Oh, the figure.
Yeah, the figure.
Yeah, that's a great piece, though.
It is, and I think that like aesthetically it's very pleasing, but it's still very like reminiscent, like that it is a figure, that it's cast in bronze, that it's still recognizable as a figure cast in bronze, that it's still incredibly referential to like traditional sculpture. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that just because they choose to ignore that it can be ignored.
Well, it poses an interesting question. What is an avant-garde? And that's also on the bottom of 74.
It was a dialogue between Alan Capro and Robert Smithson.
Mm-hmm.
What
about
is
the museum?
Yeah, what is a museum? And I thought that was so interesting because he's making essentially the exact same argument Capro is about museums being a mausoleum that Marinetti did about them being a graveyard. That they're saying the exact same thing there.
Sure.
But I just feel like,
and for any of you in any type of museum studies track, this is very important. Is to look at the whole history of kind of anti-museumology coming from artists, who see the museum as the ultimate end point, and not in a good way, not like where you made it, it's where you lost it, you've been buried. Yeah, that's totally there.
But I just thought it was interesting because like Cabral wants, he thinks that the ideal museum is completely closed off and has nothing in it, but that the building still stands. But for Marinetti, it's just like, get rid of everything.
Flood it.
Right.
Well, but curiously enough, he just wants all the pictures to float away. So he kind of wants the building to be left there too.
Just how exclusive these manifestos seem to be while trying to not be exclusive. That they keep discussing like, oh, there's not going to be any more elitism and we're going to like break down all of that stuff. But like Shika said, that it's the perspective of a young, privileged, educated white male. And he even says, you know, like, scorn for women and all that. And at the same time, it's like in the museum exhibition thing that, you know, she talks about, well, if everybody is part of this revolution, that, you know, who's going to take out the trash on Sunday morning? Yeah. And it's like, it's true that there's, you know, that they talk about how everyone can be excited into like this this moment of like action, but once everybody has been, you know, put into action, who's left to take care of all of the practical things? That there is this like complete gap between this conceptual idea and this practical reality of like living day to day, and that for the vast majority of people that is the only reality
of living day to day.
Right. And so that it becomes, I think, like, I would think that all of this like language and this anger would actually be alienating to people who are, you know, I guess accustomed to not having to think about, you know, beyond that day to day. That was just like my biggest concern with this, that I couldn't like get myself away from this whole idea that they're so concerned with like it being an everybody movement, like that Perloff uses like the term group aesthetics, but who's this group? Like, I don't know who this group is. So
No, I mean, I think it's a good question. It's I mean, for you know, the futurists, for all of us, it's probably more of a historical question.
okay. I feel like I'm talking too much. But I want to talk about Kara Walker.
I'm not coming.
Like, I was thinking, you know, because we were talking today about like that whole Kara Walker thing about how like, you know, how Robin was like, you know, it bothers me that she is trying to appeal to a certain community, but like everybody is looking at this, you know, and then my whole thought that like, you know, just because she's a black female artist making, I guess, black feminist art doesn't mean that every black feminist is going to love her.
I don't know if I should bring this up, but I was kind of talking on this page about this.
I mean, I've done.
And I've actually heard it twice in like 2 separate interviews.
Do you want to walk and talk?
Sure. Okay. And
I wouldn't even know how to begin.
some bookmarks and things like that. So
There's also a book fair this weekend in the city.
it doesn't seem as good.
No, it's an antiquarian book fair.
Was Samantha the really bitchy one?
No, it was a Victorian.
Who's
I
the
don't think
bitchy
she
one?
was bitchy.
There was a dark-haired one who was bitchy.
Not my own Santa.
She
She had a
just looked
friend who
bitchy.
was like a slave.
That's it. That's what I was thinking of. My parents wouldn't let me have an American Girl doll because there weren't any Asian ones. They thought that it was like bad for me because I wanted
What do
to.
they do now?
Do they?
They have everybody. They have a Native American girl doll. And,
Do they have a Hispanic doll?
yeah.
Yeah, that Candace brings up about what does it mean to have a kind of democratic address that is fundamentally kind of elitist in delivery is a good one, and it brings up this kind of larger question of, you know, what an artwork or an art practice.
Well, isn't that kind of like the exhibition proposal where she talks about like at the end when she's like, you can make it so personal and we'll just bring in all these people and they'll just talk about like their jobs and things, and that, like, that's art. But then I start to wonder if, like, you know, if that's art and anything you do is art and anything you say is art, then isn't everything art, and then is anything art at that point? And so like it just seems to me to be a really cyclical system to always come back to that, like over and over and over.
Conservation or registration, whose job it is to really make sure that the new thing created is going to stay.